Don't compare yourself with other people. Compare yourself with who you were yesterday. It's in responsibility that most people find the meaning that sustains them through life. It's not in happiness. It's not in impulsive pleasure. I don't tell people you're okay the way that you are. That's not the right story. The right story is you're way less than you could be. Adopt responsibility for your own well-being. Try to put your family together. Try to serve your community. Try to seek for eternal truth. That's the sort of thing that can ground you in your life enough so that you can withstand the difficulty of life. The truth is something that burns. It burns off dead wood. And people don't like having the dead wood burnt off, often because they're 95% dead wood. There's a personality trait known as agreeableness. Agreeable people are compassionate and polite. And agreeable people get paid less than disagreeable people for the same job. Women are more agreeable than men. Accept the terrible responsibility of life with eyes wide open. It's very hard to find your own words, and you don't actually exist until you have your own words. If you don't stand your ground, then all that happens is people push you backwards. Life is tragic. You are tiny and flawed and ignorant and weak, and everything else is huge, complex, and overwhelming. When you start to realize how much of what you've constructed of yourself is based on deception and lies, that is a horrifying realization. Life is very difficult. One of the most ancient of religious ideas that emerges everywhere, I would say, is that life is essentially suffering. To me, ideology is corrupt. It's a parasite on religious structures. To be an ideologue is to have all of the terrible things that are associated with religious certainty and none of the utility. If you're an ideologue, you believe everything that you think. If you're religious, there's a mystery left there. Part of the core information that I've been purveying is that identity politics is a sick game. You don't play racial, ethnic, and gender identity games. The left plays them on behalf of the oppressed, let's say, and the right tends to play them on behalf of nationalism and ethnic pride. I think they're equally dangerous. Men and women aren't the same, and they won't be the same. That doesn't mean that they can't be treated fairly. I've studied authoritarianism for a very long time, for 40 years, and they're started by people's attempts to control the ideological and linguistic territory. I'm interested in what motivates individuals to participate in atrocious acts to support their ideological identification. You should do what other people do, unless you have a very good reason not to. You should do what other people do, unless you have a very good reason not to. I have a hard time figuring out what kind of box to put me in, too, because I don't know exactly what's going on around me or why. But I need to stay outside of boxes because then I can look at what's inside of them without being part of them. It's very difficult to regulate yourself, and if you learn to do that, well, it starts to spill over. The most propagandistic element of Frozen was the transformation of the prince at the beginning of the story, who was a perfectly good guy, into a villain with no character development whatsoever about 3/4 of the way to the ending. I have something in common with Nazis in that I am opposed to the radical left. And when you oppose the radical left, you end up being a part of a much larger group that includes Nazis in it. Assuming if there's such a thing as reality, if you have a false relationship with it, how can you do anything but fail? If you learn a martial art, you learn to be dangerous, but simultaneously, you learn to control it. A properly balanced story provides an equal representation of the negative and positive attributes of, I could say the world, but it's actually a being. Harry Potter's a good example. So Harry's the hero, right? But he's tainted with evil. There's a dark and a light in every bit of that narrative. It's well balanced.